What's up, everyone, and welcome to Patronista, episode 14. This is Henry, and today we have a special guest, Deep Left Jokkul. Hope I got it right. And we also have Guillermo Escobar Vasquez here. And
What's
we're
going
gonna,
on?
yeah, what's going on? What's going on? Klaus isn't here, but I am, and we're gonna dive into some stuff. Want to go ahead and introduce yourself, you guys? How's everything? How's Christmas for you?
Everything is good. Everything is good. I haven't been a guest on anywhere in a year or something. I mean, it's been a long time. I've been traveling around, so kind of hard, but you guys have been pretty accommodating. So I don't know what we're going to get into. I'm not even super familiar with everything that you guys are about. So hopefully we'll learn a little bit about each other tonight.
Sure, yeah. No, this was random. Joke, I hit you up out of the blue. I got in contact with you on Twitter, and we hit it off, on there, and here we are conversing. So I'm just like, I'm pretty chill. Just want to have a cordial conversation, and get down to the nitty gritty of your politics. How do you come of age with your beliefs and kind of your transformation of like where did it start for you and your road to YouTube, and yeah, that's cool.
Wow, those are some big questions. It doesn't, I mean, those are not casual questions, but I can try to answer to my ability, right? So, I mean, where do I come from is a feeling of complete like nihilism. Like, I was an atheist. I was an evangelical atheist. I was watching the Young Turks. My favorite YouTuber was The Amazing Atheist. I watched literally hundreds of hours. Like, people think I talk a lot, but like, from my perspective, I've just done a small little subset of what he's done on YouTube. He's been around for 10 years now, or maybe even longer. And so, I consumed all of that, and I was a big like believer in science. And Neil deGrasse Tyson. I read Carl Sagan. Like my personal hero was Isaac Newton. Like, that was my background. And I started to feel there was something empty to it. I started to feel that it wasn't providing me with a community. There was all this online stuff. We were like, beating up atheists, or not atheists, we were beating up Christians online. I had like a blog where I would argue with, I started this when I was like 12 years old. I was precocious. Started off like very smart for my age and have kind of mellowed out as I've gotten older. But at the time, I had a blog where I would like make fun of Christians. I would argue with other 12-year-olds on the internet about religion. And I started to feel like I was missing something. I started to learn about politics more, and I started to learn about anarchism and critiques of the concept of the government, and like, what justifies the state, what justifies democracy, what justifies violence ultimately, right? The government is a monopoly on violence. How can you justify taxation? Isn't that a form of theft? So I started to get into these questions, and the origin of the state. Like, where does government come from? How do we justify and legitimize violence? And I found that it was ultimately in religion. And so I reached this breaking point where it was like, I either have to fully commit to anarchism and just say, like, yeah, abolish the government, no state, no laws or anything, or I have to say, actually, in some sense, religion is legitimate. And as I started to learn more about the history of science, the scientific method, like Isaac Newton was not an atheist, he was a religious man. And maybe I don't share his same religion, but at the same time, I started to understand the history of alchemy, occultism, and the fact that all of the early scientists were alchemists. And, we think of alchemy as superstition and magic, and it really was a esoteric religious tradition. So I started to see that, like, the things that I loved, science and, having a government and these sort of things were founded on religion in one way or another. Politics was a fundamentally religious process. I was always fascinated by sort of the extremes of human behavior. So serial killers, right? Many people can relate to this. We've got Dexter and all these, serial killer TV shows. I was always fascinated by the extremes. So I wanted to learn about political extremists, anarchists, Nazis, communists, and understand like what makes them tick, what motivates someone to be so ideological. And I got into it myself. Like I said, I was giving class presentations on why we should have a society without religious people, and like being very autistic and all these things. So I experienced it firsthand, this kind of political theology, the idea that the free market will save us, or anarchism will save us, or, communism will save us. And these kind of utopian ideas. And I saw that this is, and there are people who say this, like Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, have gotten into theories of memetics and psychology where we can draw parallels between political movements and religious movements. And a lot of people will draw that comparison to say, the both of them are illegitimate, both of them are superstitious. But I started to see these as reflective of a deep human need that we all share, that we all need mythology, not in the sense of something that's fake or false, but we need ideals, we need archetypes that we can strive for, that we can live up to, things that are magical, things that are paradoxical, that kind of cut through the Gordian knot of the paradox of human life. And I got into philosophy, not in a real thorough way, but in kind of like skimming Wikipedia articles, Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and like, what are these deep human needs that we're seeking for that religion attempts to address? Maybe it doesn't solve the problem, but it at least is trying to present these core human problems in a way that is understandable from the level of a child up to the level of, a Thomas Aquinas philosopher. So I feel like I've been on this journey for a long time. And what ultimately has kept me going is a desire to be connected with people, to have community. I think that's really where I've started. That's really where I still am today. I think ideology is an attempt to have community, but I think it's a flawed solution. I think we have to be a little bit self-aware and provide alternatives that are less pornographic. I think ideology, as most people consume it, is flashy, it's technical, it's got all this jargon that you can't understand. It's kind of like you're flaunting how smart you are, or how edgy you can be, how extreme or violent or hateful you can be. And to me, those are substitutes for the real thing. It's like when their sports team loses and they flip over the car, right? I see that as kind of silly, but at the same time reflective of a deep need we have to like fight for our side, fight for our team, fight for our tribe. I understand tribalism as a human need that we should be aware of. We're not going to eliminate it tomorrow. Maybe it's built into the reality of the universe that there's always some like level of selfishness or ego built into all life in the universe. But nonetheless, there's a tension between this real, authentic need for community, and also these superficial forms of internet ideology, whether it's the tradcath, the ortho bro, the Nazbol, the nationalist community, whatever. I think people are becoming disillusioned with this, because you see things like January 6th and what a disaster that was. You see, the collapse of Donald Trump, all these different things. I think a lot of people are waking up to the superficiality of internet ideologies, that really, what matters at the end of the day is the intimacy and depth of connection that you can have with people in real life. And if you don't have that, all it takes is like, you know, someone can pull the plug metaphorically, and like an entire internet community can just disappear. So these things are very superficial and very fragile, and a lot of people are still like hypnotized by this because it's very sexy. But I think that there are a lot of people who are, you know, falling away from it and saying, I want something deeper, I want something real. And I don't quite have all the answers for everybody, but I'm on that journey. And for other people who are on that journey, I think it's a journey we should walk not alone, but together. So that's my basic background of everything about me. And you probably could ask some more specific questions to narrow it down.
No, thank you. I know that was a loaded question, but I think one of the things that you covered that actually intrigued me is this like obsession with like political fetishism and tribalism. Like the sports team, for example, you're either a Patriots or a Cowboys fan, right? And you know, if one team loses, all hell break loose. But what's interesting is that you know, you go into critiquing nationalism, liberalism, and this like also political fetishism that you know the masses are obsessed with, and it turns out that that's not necessarily the answer. There has to be something deeper than that, and I totally hear you. I think you're right on the money there. I don't know if Angelo, welcome to the stream, or Guillermo, I don't know if you have anything to add on to there.
I mean, I could ask you a million things, but I'll let Angelo speak his mind first, and then we can go from there.
I ain't got much to say at the moment.
Yeah, go ahead, Guillermo.
Yeah, so I mean, I noticed a lot of these things that you're talking about, Jokkul. So, like, what do I mean specifically? Like, I'll see this a lot, especially like on places like Twitter. A lot of times I'll see people that very obviously grew up maybe like in a very Protestant sort of like background. You know, maybe they were like 7-day Adventists or something a bit on the more kookier side, if that makes sense. That's what I'm going to say. I'm not trying to offend anyone. But then like they'll run into certain cliques online, and then they'll all of a sudden do like a 180, and now they're a trad cap now, and now they're an Orthodox bro, and it's like they make this their entire personality on the internet, and like it's very weird seeing this happen in real time. Like, you know, because whenever I grew up ethnically Catholic, like most ethnic Catholic and Orthodox people are not living their lives like that. Like, yeah, that's a part of their culture and who they are, but this just becomes like very weird. I'm just wondering, how much of that have you seen, and why do you think people like get so radical like this when it comes to this sort of stuff?
Well, I think you've identified something important. And I mean, people always want to give credit to Moldbug for this, you know, pointing out Calvinism as the root of liberalism. You know, I think there were some other people in the neo-reactionary sphere who probably deserve more credit, but he's run out, and he's the one who got the Tucker Carlson interview, right? So he'll forever be able to stand in the light there. But I mean, there is something to it, right? There is something to the Calvinist belief that everyone should be an ideologue. Everyone should read the Bible, understand the Bible. Everyone should kind of be their own priest in a sense. And this is not, as you described, the medieval or feudal conception of religion. Not everyone is a religious fanatic. Not everyone even understands everything about the religion. We have specialists called priests, and they're the ones who are supposed to like do the spiritual work on behalf of the society and make those kind of spiritual decisions on behalf of society. And there's a separation and a distinction between those who pray, those who fight, those who work. But what Calvinism does is it says that everyone who is saved, everyone who's part of the elect, should be part of the priest class. and that there is a distinction between Christian and non-Christian on the basis of, do you fully understand the doctrine? Do you fully have an understanding of the tenets of the faith, of the ideology of the faith? Can you represent it? Can you repeat it? Can you teach it? So this, I think, is still playing out today in what you described, where someone will be a Pentecostal or a Baptist or some derivation, and they will maybe grow up being a creationist, or they'll grow up having like some kind of like very small town view. They'll go on Twitter, they'll be exposed to a couple of like atheist arguments. They'll, in a short order, become disillusioned, maybe have some doubts about their faith, and then immediately glom onto, now I'm a traditionalist Catholic, now I'm a, Orthodox. And look, if it works for people, I'm not saying that this process is necessarily evil if it leads people to a better life. But certainly in some cases it may not. And in some cases it is this kind of schizophrenia where we all have a need for truth. We all have a need for community. We all have a need for salvation. Now, for some people, salvation comes in the form of a paycheck. In some cases, it comes in the form of opiates. In some cases, salvation is video games or pornography, right? But we all have a need for, when life weighs down upon us, we need something to save us from the stress, the sin, the heaviness of life. And so for these people, they're looking for salvation, but they're also in this kind of ironic, distanced, dissociated state where nothing is real, nothing is genuine. And so I think Pastor Steven Anderson, who may be banned from YouTube on this point, I haven't kept track of him, but he's a good example of someone who's this Protestant. He stands up in front of the church and he just starts screaming fire and hell upon people. And he's very abrasive and he's very loud. And that is the kind of thing that passes for religious passion and religious fervor for these people, because it is so in your face, and there's an implicit violence about it. Again, I would describe it as something pornographic. It's like you're taking something that's supposed to be real, but because it can't be real, because it's just something on the internet, you have to like turn it up to 11. It can't just be normal sex. It has to be fetishized. And so that's how I see a lot of these kind of Protestant derived peoples who really have taken a hit. And that's for internal reasons of the logic of Protestantism, of leaning into liberalism. But it also is just, kind of the fact that America used to be a majority Protestant country. It no longer really is a majority Protestant country. And there's this sense of death that these people have, of like they are part of a dying culture. And when you try to tell them to change or adapt, they do it in very strange, bizarre, and even perverse ways that are self-harming. It's not just harmful for, I think, a lot of the critiques of, these white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It usually comes from this perspective of, oh, they're hateful toward other people. And while that may be true in many cases, I think really at the end of the day, the people they're hurting most are themselves. And as a culture or as a media, America does not seem concerned with trying to really help these people, but rather kind of scapegoating them as the white trash, the redneck, the hick, the hillbilly, whatever, to be stepped upon, to be scapegoated. All the sins of America go into those people, and we're just going to discard them, get rid of them. And maybe eventually they will kind of be relegated from the majority of America to a hated minority. But I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. From my position, it's not, it's not something that makes me feel good to think about. But it is something that's currently sort of underway. And I guess the question is, for those people, what are they going to do about it? And for other people, what lessons can we learn? How do we learn from this collapse of identity? I think one of the things we have to learn is that the relationship between a group of people and the elite of that group, so the elite white Anglo-Saxon Protestant versus the poor or middle class white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, the relationship between the Koch brothers and Bill Gates and the Walton family and the average Trump supporter. That relationship, the health of that relationship, is going to determine the future of that group. And if you come to a point where the elite of that group no longer want their people around, there's a quote by a German playwright, I think Bertolt Brecht, writes something like, the government has decided to elect a new people. And I think to an extent, we're seeing that happen. So, if we want to avoid that fate, whoever we are, whatever background we come from, I think we need to ask ourselves, who are my elite? What does it mean to be elite? And how are we going to form those relationships which are necessary to have a healthy identity?
Yeah, yeah. And, I noticed, when I was doing a lot of soul searching of several, like, the past year or so, something I really started to realize that was all clicking in place for me was this notion of racial solidarity being a thing from the elites of a society down to the commoner. It's always been a meme for the most part. It's been usually a thing out of purely political convenience when it was utilized. And I think a lot of these sort of like racialist types, especially ones that are more waspy in the US and in Britain as well, they don't really understand this. And they get into a really weird thing in their minds where, for starters, they're so deracinated that, they, that to the point where they start LARPing like they're ancient Greek people, like they're ancient Romans or the descendants of them, but they don't even relate to their own grandparents. They barely ever talk to them, and it's like what are you doing? Trying to claim Greece, Rome, Persia, when you don't even have your family affairs in order. I mean, what do you think about that sort of phenomena?
Well, I mean, there's a corollary in Black nationalist circles that people make fun of as the "we was Kangs," but everybody does this to an extent, right? Everybody wants to be connected with history, and this goes back to my point about religion. Of every religion throughout history has had some component of appealing to something greater than oneself. So whether that's your ancestors, or I mean, the Greeks and Romans themselves said that, our kings are descended from gods, and these people like Hercules or Zeus, they've done these amazing things. They've conquered nature, they've controlled the heavens and the earth. And so every people throughout history has done something where they kind of magnify their origins, they magnify their ancestry beyond what is probably warranted. So that's just, a part of human culture. But I think, yes, this aspect of religion can become perverse, that it is good to look toward the past and say, wow, we can admire classical civilization, or we can admire, the philosophy, Greek philosophy, or something like that. We can go back and we can be connected to that and have a sense of the vastness of the human experience. And it puts things in perspective, and it allows us to not get bogged down in kind of like the superficiality of the moment. But yeah, that can become, in like a mimetic space like Twitter, you're just posting memes about, Hyperborea or something like this. And then you look inwardly at these people, and I don't see the Hyperboreans. I see a lot of desperate people who are desperate for something real, for something great, for something powerful. But oftentimes, as you say, these people in their personal lives, they don't have even the power over themselves, like the power to, you know, go and clean their room and get a job and get a girlfriend and these sorts of things. And I'm not saying that to say that, oh, well, I'm superior because I have done those things. I'm saying that that is really, that is like power on a basic level, and things sort of scale from there. And so, that is how things should be thought of. And if there's something that is becoming a replacement or a substitute, I compare it to pornography, because when we all want intimacy, we all want to be creative, we want to be reproductive. That's sexual energy. We want to be attractive. But when we take something like pornography, which hacks the mind, which replaces that, acts as a substitute and says, oh, you have a harem of all these beautiful women, they'll do anything for you. It actually takes what was initially a driving force for life, and it makes it into solipsism and hedonism. And that's how I see these political forms. When someone says, oh yeah, Hyperborea, and we're we're going to be fascists, and we're strong and powerful, and we're incels, and we hate women, and like these kind of flashy statements, they're really signaling to each other as desperate, disenfranchised young men who don't have social status. They're signaling to each other. It's a competition to see, who can be the edgiest, who can be the most offensive, but they're not actually translating that into power in the real world. They're not actually transferring that into money and real estate, relationships, employment, things of that nature.
Not
So,
only that, but these guys, they'll often be like, get out of the cities. We got to move all the way to this rural land. It's like, do you guys even understand how power works? The cities are the centers of political power. If you flee them, like people that are actually like, you can make fun of these people that you call soy boys, in the cities, but for starters, they're walking around the whole day. They're probably more fit than you. They're actually like, they're that's where all the jobs are at. That's where all the connections are to be made. I think it's a giant cope whenever you have a lot of times these are suburbanites saying this shit too. And yeah, and there was another point I wanted to touch on as well where you know, kind of like these guys, like I remember I tried listening to a TRS podcast a few months ago just to like see where these people are kind of going. Uh and it kind of just struck this theme that has kind of been going on in my head, kind of struck me again, where it's like these are temporarily inconvenienced, like Hyperborean overlords. And what I mean by that is, like, these guys act like they're the master race, like they fucking dominate, their genes are the best. But you listen to the actual podcasts, what do they do most of the time? Well, they whine about how Jews have their shit together way more than them. They whine about how like black people are constantly punking them and bullying them. And it's like, does this really sound like a powerful people that are worthy of respect to me? And it's like, to me, it doesn't. To me, it just sounds like you're very bitter. And that's why a big reason why I don't take the whole solidarity with Palestine thing legit at all. It's like, I honestly think for the most part, you guys are jealous of Israel. You'd love to have a state where you could just ethically cleanse people and just, treat them like they're trash. I don't know. What do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to believe these people. And again, maybe there are exceptions. I don't know every individual, right? I can't look into people's hearts, but um, yeah, I mean, I'll give an example, because I don't, honestly, from my perspective, I don't see like people as whether they pretend to or not. Like the Palestinian issue just isn't really big. Maybe if there's another flare up or something, like, but the most recent interaction that I've seen between the far right and the Muslim world has been over the Taliban, right? So that was very prominent to me, where people were saying that the right wing should emulate the Taliban because they're conservative and they're religious, and they beat they beat Joe Biden, and also they show that the Second Amendment shows that we can overthrow the government, and the Taliban show they're sexist and they hate women and they hate gay people, and like all of these things that were supposed to be emulated. And so I made a series of critiques at the time of how that's a lot of wishful thinking, how the situation may be more complex, how the war in Afghanistan was not a war of necessity, and the distinction to be made there between an unnecessary war and a necessary war. But there is this kind of tendency, again, to project, right? So maybe I'm a loser, but in the ancient past, I was a Hyperborean. Or, maybe I'm a loser, but look at those, I'm going to live vicariously through the Taliban, right? When the Taliban, does something really based and red-pilled, I'm going to cheer on the Taliban and live vicariously through that. And so I think that's how a lot of them see the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is through this vicarious analogy. Do they actually have some like deep empathy for Palestinian people? In most cases, probably not. Maybe and on some level, I mean, I personally believe that the extent to which you can have true empathy for someone is really related to the intimacy that you have with those people, right? So if you are Palestinian, your family's Palestinian, obviously that issue is going to be very real for you. If you're Muslim, even that issue is going to be somewhat real to you. But if you're like some, Protestant, white nationalist living on the other side of the planet, and you just cheering for the Palestinians, not because you love them, but just because you hate Israel, that again is it's more kind of sports team stuff, right? Whatever is happening in Israel and Palestine is not of real material consequence to these people in the day to day, but it's a way to feel a certain sense of victory, right? When they're not able to create a game plan for their own lives. And one of the things that you said that I want to comment upon is just this basic distinction between rural and urban. And like I'm in the woods right now, I'd have no problem with rural people, but I also don't have this weird fetishization of farm life. Like I've done farm work, I've lived in rural places. I don't view it as, again, the salvation of like, oh, well, we'll live in the woods and everything will be solved. No, I mean, living in a rural part of the country is difficult. And in fact, the people in a rural part of the country are not necessarily better people than people who live in a city. The obesity rates, even when we talk about this concept of being a farmer, most farming in America is done by large corporations like Monsanto, or even just large farm holders. And most of the people actually farming the land are Hispanic or immigrants. It's not, frankly, these white rural people may not even know how to farm. And if you look at the welfare numbers, I know there's a stereotype about Black people using welfare, but really we should also talk about white people living in rural counties, these economically depressed places where everyone's moving out. They're on welfare to a heavy extent, and they are obese to a heavy extent, much more than the cities. So there is an indicator there. I mean, whether you're fat or skinny doesn't tell you everything about a person, but it is an indicator of some kind of general health, some kind of psychological, level of self-respect, where you're going in life. I almost never see this gratuitous obesity in a major city that you see that is just frequent in these rural places where people are just, it's like this wall, right? We have the concept of the Walmart dwell. Well, it's because Walmart is everywhere. And in a rural place, Walmart is the only store. And so you have these people who are like 200, 300 pounds, 400 pounds overweight. And that
American exceptionalism,
particular to rural areas.
No, I was just going to say, it's so much for American exceptionalism when in reality we should be looking in and, what we find is in rural America, there's these problems with obesity, fentanyl, and methamphetamine, etc. So yeah, it's definitely something that I can relate to. With I grew up in an urban area, in a big city, and for me, it was always a culture shock to go below the Mason-Dixon line, because that's entering a different part of this country that I wasn't exposed to.
Even in the East Coast, like you probably notice this too. Like when you talk about like going out to the country, like you usually get the image of like shady people. Like it's not like, the rural parts are not good. It's kind of like you view it as city. It's like it's shady. It's people are poor out there.
Angelo, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I wanted to mention something that was mentioned about the Puritans and religion, and perhaps like one of the things from Mobuck is that you mentioned that the priestly class, that's Calvinists. I guess back in the inception of America, they were more scholarly, and now it's like those Calvinists are the ones pushing the woke liberal religion. And do you see a translation from where we started in 1776 to where we are now, where it's like we're going in this direction of liberalism and this like new form of Protestantism, where it's like the wokeism stuff, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's a relationship between the two. I think ultimately we have to understand as well the economic dimension of religion. That when you have a society that's based around agriculture, the type of ideology, propaganda, the belief system that you promote is going to have some sort of selfish incentive influencing it. That's not to say that, we can't have religious beliefs which are not purely materialistic, but it's to say that there is always a material incentive that is present upon any religious system. The fact that we're, alive in material reality is a consequence of the fact that we eat food and we defend ourselves. And so we abide by these certain limits, and I call them incentives because they're not hard laws, but there are rewards to following economic trends. And if the economic trend is we want as many people as possible to farm the land, because the more workers we have, the more crops we have, the more food we have, the more food we have, the more knights we can feed, the more knights we can feed, the bigger armies we can have. I mean, this is a very basic scheme. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. But in such a society, you're going to have family values. You're going to have values that promote childbirth and child rearing and the survival of children. But when the economy shifts over time, new values are incentivized. And I think that's a huge part behind when we look at the woke ideology. There is a way of looking at population as a conspiratorial topic. But I think there is also a way of looking at depopulation from an economic perspective and from a perspective of incentives. In a feudal society, there really is no such thing as overpopulation, because what happens is the peasants have 8 children, then disease comes and kills 4 children, and then malnutrition or an accident comes. Just reading a comment here: agriculture is mechanized industrial, it's not the smallholder system, right? So economic situation has changed, And therefore, we actually do have a concept of overpopulation because there are limited resources, because food is no longer the most expensive resource. It's no longer the most important resource. Land is not the most important resource, or at least agricultural land. Resources that are more important now are technical skills, our ability to extract minerals from the earth and to arrange them into machines which can automate industrial processes. This makes people economically less valuable. When you can have a self-driving car, then all those truck drivers are now unemployed. The sort of libertarian free market defense of this system is that, oh, well, they can just learn to program. But these sort of skills are not plastic. You simply can't say, well, I was a truck driver for 20 years. Now tomorrow I'm going to learn how to code. That's really not how the human mind works. And so we are reaching a point where the incentive really is to drive people to have less children, and anything which can accomplish that is promoted. And people will say, well, look at Africa. Africa's having a lot of children. What they fail to understand is they're looking at a speeding car without realizing that the car is hitting the brakes, that African fertility is decreasing faster than anywhere else in the world. So it's not the exception. In fact, it proves the point. So that's the basic viewpoint that I have with regard to the difference between, say, the American liberalism of the 18th century versus the American liberalism of 2022, is ultimately a huge part of it has to come down to economic incentives, that we no longer have family values because that's not incentivized by the economy. Instead, there's a desire to depopulate through whatever means necessary: chemical, dietary, psychological, religious, consumeristic, hedonistic, whatever is necessary to achieve that. That is what is promoted. And again, people will take that in a conspiratorial direction. I don't think that's necessary. I think it can be explained through economic incentives. Not to say that I, deny that people can have conversations that are not public, but just to say that that sort of speculation is unfalsifiable. But the economic changes that I talk about are very self-evident in our daily lives.
And I think we're on the same wavelength. One of the things that come to mind is automation. Where do we go next? Because there's, like you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of truckers that are going to be unemployed. I mean, yeah, it's like 2016. Clinton said we'll teach them to code. I know recently Andrew Yang was floating the idea of UBI, Universal Basic Income, and I think we would agree that those aren't the solutions. These are people that actually have a, I guess, semi-skill, to be a trucker and go out there. It's something that we want to accommodate in the near future. I just don't have the answers to, but definitely something that, I think about.
I guess my response to the tragedy of the truckers is that I am not trying to save the world. If I had supreme power, then of course I would try to do what's right, or at least that's what I would say. Now, if I actually had supreme power, maybe I would just be a total authoritarian, tyrant or something. But we'd like to say, oh, well, if I could change it, this is what I would do. For me, I like to think about that with respect to certain issues like environmentalism. I really do believe in conservationism, protecting our environment for the sake of the people who live on the planet, not for the sake necessarily of all the animals, although I want to preserve them too. I'd like to think about those sort of policies from like, oh, what would I do? But I have a self-awareness, which is that in order for policies to pass, the power on the side of the policy pusher has to be greater than the policy opponent. And with regards to economic policy in this country, we're talking about billions and even trillions of dollars that is pushing toward automation. And no amount of Tucker Carlson or Bernie Sanders or whoever is trying to stop this wave, there is nothing that could stop this short of like a civilizational collapse, which I believe is unlikely. I think the people who believe that, you know, the world's going to collapse are engaging in wishful thinking. They haven't studied the history of how empires decline. It takes centuries. It doesn't happen all at once. Like the Soviet Union was actually, you know, a bad example in terms of this. And I can go more into that if you want. But the point here is that I'm not trying to save America, Americans, Western civilization, or any of that. What I'm trying to do is give people the tools to understand what's going on. And if they can use those tools to their advantage, then that's great. But I understand at the same time that the biblical story of Noah applies to the present situation, or even, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah to an extent. We have cataclysms throughout history, economic shifts, warfare, plague. Not everyone will survive. Not everyone is going to make it. And that's not a good thing. I'm not here saying I'm the superior elite to, you know, and good riddance to these people. That's not my attitude, but it is realistic to say that a lot of people won't make it. And the question is, those of us who have the self-awareness of what's going on, what can we do to try to get out ahead of this, to understand that trucking jobs may not be here forever. In my opinion, you know, in the next 10 years, they might disappear. If you're in that industry, or you have friends or family who are in that, or similar industries, that, you know, food industry, even education to an extent, everything is going to be affected by this. What can we do here and now to try to prepare for that mentally, emotionally, and economically? And I think it does require that we develop skills on a technical basis, but also that we develop skills socially and in terms of religion, that which binds us together. If we have networks of people where we're willing to look out for each other, where we view ourselves as being connected, then it's going to be a lot easier to weather these storms. It's going to be a lot easier to survive. And I think even in, you know, a very pessimistic situation, you say, well, hey, maybe we don't survive. Maybe we try our best and we still get kind of crushed by these economic changes. I think it's a lot better to go down with friends and family than to go down alone. I mean, and that may sound very fatalistic, but I think that's really the only thing there is to do, is to say, you know, if you are economically vulnerable, if you're not part of the elite and you don't have billions of dollars, and you're one of these people who is looking at the economic future and you're saying, I might have less money and less wealth than my grandparents. I mean, that's a reality. Real wages have decreased. It's already here. You know, the economic collapse for the middle class, for the working class, is already here, and it's going to get worse, in my opinion. So how are we going to deal with that? It's not just about learning to code. It's not just about learning to program, but really, I think it's about finding reasons to survive in a world that will become increasingly difficult. And those reasons are not going to be selfish reasons. They're going to be the love for the friends and family and for your community.
Yeah, so I think we should get into this sort of thing. So I think after I went through your YouTube channel a little bit, I would say if there's anything you're most known for, it's kind of like your series that you've created that's like debunking, I guess, rightist lies. And, the audience here that's listening, I would wager, aside from the fact a giant chunk of these are like loser trolls, the ones that are actually trying to learn something, they probably haven't seen these videos and consumed them, and they probably don't know what you're about. Could you, just for the audience, kind of explain maybe some of like these most common rightist like lies, what they're about, you know, what the whole premise is in general? And I might cut you off a little bit just to explain a few things here and there, but I would really like you to kind of just talk about the series in general and then go into like, you know, some of the most common lies that you run into on the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of them, and the reason I made that series
Yeah.
was because I do a lot of sort of off the cuff rambles, like we're just having a conversation right now. But I found that a lot of these lies were so um, insidious and minute, and they're things that people will say to you, and it's kind of something small. They'll sort of slip it in there, and you might not even be able to identify what they're saying before they've already gone on and they've sort of based another conclusion off the previous lie. And so they stack so many things on top of each other. It's like by the time you've gotten to the conclusion, there's so much to unpack that you're like fighting over these little pedantic nitpicking issues. And so that's why I created a video almost 2 years ago now, I think. I mean, what was it, 2000? I don't even remember if it was 2019 or 2020. But it's going to be 2 years coming into the new year here. And it was called 50 Rightist Lies. And I just went through every single one I could try to do. And then in subsequent videos, I tried to flesh that out and like spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes or longer on one of these specific lies. And so I go into things like I've mentioned before. A lot of them are based on this idea of the right wing is like destined for victory. It's destined for victory because, you know, racism is inevitable. And so everyone's just going to be racist. And so in this racist future, like right now, everyone hates us and we're villains, but in the future, everyone's going to love us and we're going to be the martyrs that are remembered. You know, the idea that history is like a pendulum, and you know it starts over here in conservative land, and then it swings over into liberal land, and then it ultimately, inevitably, swings back to the right wing. That's not actually how history works, and of course, there are cycles. Right, there are cycles of prosperity and poverty, war and peace, and so on. History is full of cycles, but it's also filled with real, substantial changes. And for me, understanding the nature of the right wing and the left wing is fundamental to actually understanding this issue of why does it seem like the left always wins. That's kind of what I mean by this term deep left, is like there's something deep in politics itself, which inevitably sort of drags us toward the left, even if we have occasional backward steps. So, like, there are a couple, and I'm happy for you to bring up any particular examples you want to go into. I don't know if you have any picked out or specifics that you wanted me to talk about.
So I'm looking at the comment section for for the one you made. I can tell a lot of these people are just people that really hate you, like commenting, but it, you know, helps the algorithm, so I get it. But this is one common thing that I see a lot with these sorts of people. So it's this comment right here where it says, from 23andMe's website, Ashkenazi descendants remain more genetically similar to other Jewish populations than to their European neighbors, reflecting shared Western Asian origins. They have their own reference population and ancestry composition because Ashkenazi Jews are so genetically distinct. And it's like, this is what happens, in my opinion, when you live life looking at like DNA charts, looking at haplogroups, and you're like, you think that this is what your identity fundamentally is. And my point being is that when you walk around on the street, people don't go, look at that Jew, you know? You're pretty much just an ordinary white guy. And Jews have been white Americans since the very beginning of this country, you know? And I think a lot of people don't understand this sort of thing. And then I've noticed that when people don't like me, now I'm a Jew all of a sudden, even though I'm not Jewish in the slightest. But yeah, why do you think people behave like this, where it's not, where these people are like, I don't care about what language you speak, what religion you practice, what your metaphysical worldview is. What does that DNA chart say? What does your haplogroup say? Like, this is not how civilizations have ever had real identity, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way to be. I mean, that's a very charitable way to say it. Okay, so let's kind of back up and ask, like, where does this come from? How did we get to the point where like teenagers or the internet are like looking at haplogroup charts? Like, what brought us here? And where does this lead us, right? Because the question becomes, if everything is about genetics, and I have a video called basically I don't believe in genetics, and I go into what exactly I mean by that. But to the extent that if we say, for instance, someone says to me, well, genetics determines this or genetics determines that, it's like, okay, I can't change that. If something like people will say to me in these comments, they'll say, well, Jews are genetically such and such. And it's like, well, if you're saying I'm genetically a certain way, I can't change that. So it's not really worth even me talking about. Now, from their perspective, why are they talking about it? They're talking about it because they have this idea that humans are divisible into these genetic groups and that they all belong in different areas. Like they're different animals who belong in different enclosures, different barnyards, and we can separate all the animals out, and this will be the perfect this is autism. This is autistic. This is okay. All the blonde-haired people will be here, and the blue-eyed people will be here, and then the brown people will be over there, and we'll all be separate in our perfect little spaces, and there will be no conflict, and it will be. I mean, this is the mentality of an autistic child who says, well, I have my peas on this side of the plate, and I don't mix my peas with my beans. Everything is separate. Right? This has nothing to do with political power. This has everything to do with, and look, I have a little bit of autism myself. I don't say this again. None of these critiques I have are me like looking from my high castle down on these poor, unfortunate souls. This is me as someone who has spent hours in MS Paint making fantasy maps, right? And I did that because it was fun. And so I understand why people go on the internet and they think it's fun to look at all these haplogroups. I'm just pointing out the truth that obsessing over haplogroups is not actually going to lead you to political power. It is mostly a waste of time. If anything, it's a form of fetishism. I made a video called Liars on the Right, Edward Dutton, and I say he's a smart guy, but he's a fetishist. He's going around saying, oh, well, this gene makes you this level of conscientiousness and, this in-group preference and blah, blah, blah. And he's an associate professor in a foreign country. He couldn't become a professor in his own country, so he went to a different country, married a foreign woman, and now he's an associate professor. It's like, bro, all these 50,000 subscribers, I guess he's even bigger than Keith. All these people are worshiping him. The second I have a slight criticism of him or say, like, maybe he's not all that, it's like, how dare you insult Lord Dutton, our Lord and Savior of the haplogroups. He will lead us to victory by statistics. And it's like, guys, statistics are a tool that you can use to understand the world. It's not actually a path to power. I don't care how many like maps and statistics you have. You're not actually achieving things in life. You're not actually dealing with the real problems that we all face, no matter what background you're from. Again, unless you're like a billionaire, everybody is feeling the heat, right? Everybody is feeling these cultural changes, this sort of flood of confusion and disorientation. We are all subject to it. And simply like analytically, empirically dissecting, a standard deviation IQ is the difference between a lawyer and, a janitor or something. It's like, well, what are you? What have you done with your life?
Yeah. And a lot of this feels like it's grifting in a lot of ways. And what do I mean by this? So like, I remember Edward Dutton he had like a YouTube video that he like released, and it said like, "Why are left wingers like so ugly?" And it's like, bro, have you looked in the fucking mirror, Edward? Like these people just like lack so much self awareness. Where like they want to like openly LARP like they're these super alpha chads, and it's like real chads are not running around doing this. They just live their lives and they don't have autism and they just talk to women. Like, and it's, I don't know, it's just funny to me. But like, they like to play up to their audience's egos, and if you do it well, I mean, I guess you could really build up a sizable audience for yourself, if that makes sense.
He calls them spiteful mutants on his channel.
He looks like
yeah.
one.
Right, that's the point. Yeah, so
Yeah,
the lies on the
I won't throw stones in glass houses, but no, you make a good point about the grifting of, you know, these people like to think of themselves as inherently superior to the leftists, but the truth is, who is in power? I mean, they will admit the leftists are in power. So how did that happen? They honestly, I don't think have a good answer to that question. It usually turns down to, oh, they tricked us, or they it was an accident, or it's the Kali Yuga or something. They have some kind of, you know, mystical explanation, but I don't think any of those are reflect reality.
So I want to just change the subject a tiny bit, but I'm just curious on what you think since we've been talking about rightists for a while. But I'd like to hear your input on this. So are you familiar with sort of like the American, I guess, like socialist scene online and sort of like the big like civil war that's kind of been going down a little bit?
I mean, I know big names like Hassan, Vaush, Haas. Like, I'm familiar with some of the personalities.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean.
Try to follow them to an extent, sure.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of curious. So apparently there were like actual like leaked documents that came out that was kind of indicating that people like Vaush, Hassan, these sorts of people, that they're being artificially inflated through like by I guess federal agencies and probably, you know, shady, really shady third parties as well that are probably loosely connected. And what my question to you is, what sort of parallels do you think the viewers here should take in terms of like maybe people comparing people like Vaush and Nick Fuentes and people like that are really big in these supposed dissident circles?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a clip of Vaush where he basically said something like, you know, I don't support CIA coups, but maybe we need to make an exception here. Like, maybe actually the CIA are the good guys. And it's like, I just, unless you're like literally 17 years old and you know nothing about history, you're just like, Vaush loves trans people and I love trans people, and that's good enough for me. And everything else, I'm just going to assume that, yeah, this is all kosher. This is all authentic left wing stuff. I mean, that's another reason why I like the term deep left, because all of the people who you see in the mainstream left are very much connected to power in one way or another, whether they realize it or not. And I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I never assume like the conspiratorial federal agent stuff. But look, you know, if documents come out, I haven't seen them myself, so I can't comment on them. But you know, I wouldn't be totally surprised, because it's not the first time this has happened. We know that feminism in America and other, what the right calls cultural Marxism, was a product not of the Soviet Union, but of the CIA, of the capitalist CIA, right? So you
Right,
look at the
working with
Soviet,
Trotskyites,
they were
yeah.
relatively conservative compared to that. And I mean, that would just be part and parcel of the last at least 60 years, if not further, but at least 60 years of the intelligence community in America trying to move the cultural conversation in a way that they view as beneficial to them. And so they're willing to, in the same way that the alt right will throw out kind of racist red meat and say, like, yeah, you know, we're going to be really racist, and the Zoomers like sort of eat this up as a really edgy thing. You see the mainstream left doing the same thing with like the trans issues or these really kind of hot button things that affect a very small proportion of people. Things that, frankly, again, the whole autism issue is not unrelated to some of these sexual issues and gender issues. Um, you know, they throw out these very fringe ideas, but what's at the heart of it? It's like, go consume Marvel movies, watch pornography, you know, just don't do anything crazy, just do all the normal stuff, vote for Joe Biden, everything will be fine. Like, that's what Vaush's message is. That's who Hassan is. And oh, maybe if you're a really edgy leftist, you'll vote for Bernie Sanders. Like, that's, oh, Jimmy Dore. It's like, oh, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, who every time cucks to Hillary Clinton, cucks to Joe Biden, that's your principled opposition. So the whole thing is fake. The whole thing is superficial.
Yeah.
And it's sad because, you know, you'd like to think, okay, well, the left is in a complete disaster. Maybe we can go over to the right wing. Maybe they'll be authentic and better. But they have a lot of the same problems, just manifested from this radical polarization where, oh, well, if the left, you know, loves trans people, we'll make our entire identity out of hating them. And if the left is feminist, we're going to be sexist. If the left is inclusive, we're going to be racist. And there's never any attempt to say, okay, what are we besides reactionaries? What are we actually trying to build here? And to be truthful with you, I would describe Vaush as a reactionary. What does he do? Is he says, oh, well, you know, Trump is really bad. So to kind of like rebel against Daddy Trump, you know, we're just going to give him the middle finger, and we're going to be, you know, fly the rainbow flag especially hard today to really upset those conservatives.
And yeah, Rancho's comment here is really good. Zoomers don't believe in hierarchy. Even the edgiest one's a liberal when you break down the worldview. And, you know, that's the thing in general about U.S. politics is like a lot of these young guys will start forming their identities around these parties. But these are quite literally two competing brands of liberalism going at it with each other. You know, one's obviously more neoliberal oriented and the other tries to lot more like their classical liberals, but you're not getting anything crazy different, you know, with these two people. I mean, with Trump, we even got a stimulus check. We ain't got shit with Biden here, you know? Even Biden's basically saying, oh, like, we'll let the states solve this COVID problem. And like people like Vaush just say, yeah, just keep voting Democrat. And it's like, at some point you have to realize this dialectic is stupid. And it's just going to, if you're going to continue going down that road, you're going to just make so many enemies with people, like among like families and potential friends, that you really don't need to be doing, you know? I've heard of, and I think this happens more with white people, sadly, but I feel like a lot of white people will have their entire families ruined over whether they like Trump or not. And it's like, that really should not be happening. This fucking orange buffoon should not be destroying people's families. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's like, are white people okay? Like, are they doing okay? The answer is no. The answer is, like, these are people who, I mean, and we can understand that within white people, there are different subgroups, some of whom are doing better than others. It's not a monolith. But when we use this term white, we are speaking of kind of like this generic middle class person who, you know, my dad was blue collar and I got a college education. And like, there's this whole narrative of the American dream. Everyone, you know, you reach a certain age, you buy a car in your 20s, you buy a house in your 30s. There's a smooth progression. You get your retirement when you're 65, you go to the Bahamas. And this is this narrative that is just completely collapsing. It's completely collapsing and people are freaking out. And I do see value, even though I disagree with a lot of the organicism of Oswald Spengler. I think there is something to take from his idea that when a civilization starts to collapse, you get what is called a second religiousness. You get people who start going into weird cults because they're just desperate for answers. They don't know what to do. They're like a scared animal, and they're just trying to find something to save them. And for many people, unfortunately, that was Donald Trump, which is a sad thing to say, but that is absolutely true. And I've seen it firsthand, people who believe that Donald Trump is essentially their God. We saw that in Rome with a man like Caesar. Now, Caesar, of course, was a military general, and he, tried to take over the Roman state, remake it in his image, was assassinated, and we got a whole bunch of emperors who came after him that began this slow decline of Rome. People have compared Trumpism to Caesarism, and I think the thing to understand there is not that America is going to collapse like the Soviet Union. It's also not the case that America is going to, we're going to make America great again. Trump, his line was, that's not going to happen, right? We're not going back to the 1950s. That's that post-war economy where we had destroyed Europe and we were basically forcing them to buy American goods. That's not coming back. And so there's going to be a long decline with many bumps in the road. The state is still going to be here. The government's still going to be here. We're going to have to deal with a bureaucracy that is going to be, attempt to overreach into people's lives. I mean, I don't know how much you guys want to get into that, but there's going to be a bureaucracy which continues to try to cannibalize what's left of American society. It's not going to be a quick, merciful death. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process that, again, could take centuries. And frankly, I am not at all, going to count out the idea that things like automation and artificial intelligence and even genetic engineering, genetic technology that we've seen with, I don't know what keywords we can drop on this channel, but certain health companies have been using, they've been using products that are supposed to modify your genetic code in order to make you healthier. So that sort of thing, we could see more of that in the future. These are going to be big game changers that mean that, the system is going to continue. It's not going to get better for the middle class or the working class. But the idea that like everything's going to collapse tomorrow and, the right-wing warrior will rise from the ashes with his cans of food and ammo, that's not happening either.
No, yeah, that's a good answer. Henry, do you have anything you want to add to the discussion?
No, I was just thinking about Trump and his brand of nationalism that appealed to the populist movement. I saw an interview you did where you were discussing about nationalism, and someone brought up, like, say, Hungary, for instance, like they're doing it right, and that's the direction we should be going in. When in reality, it's just like this form of liberalism where it's like they're a few steps behind. Eventually, they'll catch up. And I just wanted your thoughts on nationalism in relation to Trumpism and what's to come. I see Seth else in the background.
So there's a couple of things we can talk about with Hungary, with Francisco Franco, with Metaxas in Greece. Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. But, throughout the 20th century, we have seen right-wing reactionaries, populists come to power. I believe in, Argentina, this is where we get like the helicopter meme, right, of the libertarians throwing communists out of helicopters. In Chile. Well, I'm glad I'm on the podcast where people are going to know something about South America, because I certainly don't. But the reason why I bring up that example is because we can see these cycles where you will have Spain is an example I'm more familiar with, is that you had an extreme communist, anarchist, leftist revolution in the country, where they were literally going into monasteries of a Catholic country, which is still a monarchy, and they were dragging out the graves of nuns, and they were desecrating the graves, right? So this was the fanaticism that they were facing, and the reaction from Francisco Franco was to unite with the church, unite with the military, take over the country, establish a dictatorship. And he did that for about 30 years. And when he died in 1975, the country of Spain didn't immediately, in a day and night situation, like completely go back to where it was before in the 1920s and 30s, but it has continued on to the present day, where Spain, relatively speaking, is one of the more left-wing countries of Europe. I mean, we often think of Germany as being, or Sweden as being, the extreme left-wing. But the truth is, the reason why that is a perception is because of the migrant crisis, that migrants want to go to economically rich places with good welfare systems, which include Greece, Britain, France to an extent, and Sweden. They do not want to go to Spain, because Spain, frankly, is out of the way, doesn't have a great welfare system relatively, doesn't have a great economy relatively. But that kind of disguises the fact that Spain, again, relatively, politically, religiously, has shifted far to the left since the time of Franco. And so when we look at these examples, and now Hungary is the latest example, or Poland or Russia, oh, look, they're bucking the trend. It's an alternative. This is, we need to unite the Eastern Bloc, the Visegrad group. The truth is that these Eastern European countries are extremely financially dependent upon the European Union, which is principally made up of Germany and France. As long as you are in an economic union of that nature, you are going to be at the behest of the political powers at the center of that union. And so Hungary, in terms of these social attitudes, is continuing toward what we would generally call the left, right? If you poll every generation in Hungary, from Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, Zoomer, and so on, you're going to find uniformly that the positions on gay marriage, the positions on transgender or any kind of sexual issues, is always headed toward the left. These attitudes are headed toward this kind of liberal Hollywood agenda that is also American centric, right? So there is a center of power, there's a center of gravity, there are economic incentives behind these ideologies that cause them to spread. Hungary is doing a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. Immigrants don't want to go to Hungary. Hungary is a relatively poor country. Now, relatives to say Ukraine, Hungary's better than Ukraine, right? But still, immigrants don't want to go to Hungary. So when Hungary says, we'll protect our white Christian heritage, we don't want any immigrants, it's like they didn't want to go to your country anyway. They would so much rather go to Germany. They would so much rather go to France and Britain and Sweden. And so it's a lot of grandstanding and saber rattling, and people like Tucker Carlson will go there and they will say, oh, Hungary, you're doing it right, we want to be like you. But the truth is, Hungary is allowed to be a little bit zany, a little bit offbeat, a little bit against the grain, because Hungary doesn't matter. Hungary is this kind of relatively backwater country on the border of the Balkans. No one really cares what Hungary does, because Hungary does not lead Europe. Germany, France, even to an extent, Sweden is a more important country than Hungary. And I don't say that to be insulting. I mean, I love Hungarians in Hungary, and I've known those people, and I tried to learn their language. It's very hard. But it's just to say that their style of politics is not an alternative. It is not actually an indication of some kind of, again, the pendulum swinging back towards the right wing. And even to go deeper of this story that Hungarians now have for their fight against communism, the truth is, under communism, Hungary was much more conservative. They had less immigration, they had less, homosexual norms. They had a lot less of these things that we consider to be liberal under communism. And in fact, if you poll people in Hungary, they will admit that, hey, a lot of things were better under communism. Now, some of them will disagree with that, right? But the truth is that communism did not fall in Hungary because in 1989 they were being put into slave camps and it was so terrible. The
No.
truth is that communism fell because there was an intellectual revolution at the top and a financial revolution within Russia, and that had a domino effect for Hungary and, of course, the CIA, who was looking to collaborate with people like Anatoly Chubais, who's a close advisor to Putin. So there's a whole backstory to how that happened, and it's not like this story of the popular revolution in Hungary. The people had enough of communism, as if communism was like trying to bring gay marriage to Hungary in 1989 or something, and that's what they were fighting against, right? So the narrative is a little bit of a stretch.
I was going to say it depends what countries you're analyzing, but if we're talking about like the Eastern Bloc countries, I mean, objectively, these people had much higher living standards, especially when we're talking about like Yugoslavs. It's a no-brainer. There are some countries that tried implementing these sorts of things, but I think this is why I'm very much trying to get more into depoliticizing yourself in a certain way, if that makes sense, because if, for example, if you look at Venezuela, you can try to make that an indication of whether Marxism is a viable, I guess, like way to run your country. But to me, it's like Venezuela in the current state that it's in is the result of putting a barely literate bus driver as the person running your country. And it's like you just can't have that. It doesn't matter what his ideology is going to be. They're going to run a country into the ground if you don't have people who are good at statescraft and know what they're doing. And I think that's one reason that Francisco Franco was pretty good at, I guess, running Spain, was the fact that he knew, for starters, he couldn't just let the West exploit Spain, but at the same time, he was able to appoint fairly apolitical people that were very good at statescraft in order to help run Spain. And it's better to have people that are not overtly political, but are very talented, I think, running a country than extreme ideologues that just live on their own planet, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that this concept of technocracy as a purely apolitical project fails to understand the religious dimension of politics. So, I mean, I think that we should understand the superficiality of the kind of capitalist versus socialist divide. I mean, so I agree with part of what you're saying here, but I think on another level, there's a part of me that says like, okay, yeah, Franco could make the trains run on time for 30 years or something, but is that really a viable alternative, or something that I'm going to try to revive Francoism or support Franco because maybe his bureaucratic state was more of an efficient technocracy versus the social democracy that followed? And like, look, yeah, there are statistics and there are facts and figures on the ground of what we could support, this or that. But I think that one of the ways that I look at Franco is in his relationship to Britain, and that he had a very close relationship with British intelligence. And when we ask where a lot of these liberal norms come from, and these what I view as religious ideas, where they come from, it is from British intelligence, American intelligence. So I don't know to what extent Franco saw into the future and understood where all of this was going. And I don't really, have a super strong opinion on it, other than to say like the idea of and I think we saw this in America with Trump, of like at first he was the least Republican. It was like the guy who was like, oh yeah, he used to support Planned Parenthood, and he he's been divorced, and he's not really a hardline conservative. He just wants to get things done. He's a businessman. He just wants to, make the trains run on time, and he's going to whip the country into shape and run it like a business and make us successful again. So I think there are going to be people who try to sell that kind of technocratic idea of like, and look at Trump's administration. He had Democrats in the early, I remember Cohen was in there, and he made that statement about like, oh, well, he's a globalist, but he's also a nationalist. He's kind of both. He tried to do the thing where he's going to make friends with everyone. He's going to be friends with Carl Icahn and all these people across the political spectrum. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm also not saying it's something that I put a lot of stock in, that I put a lot of hope in the long term. From my position, the government is in a slow decline. It's not going to collapse, but it is going to get worse just across the board. Roads are going to get worse. Public education is going to get worse. And so we have to get real about that and basically stop looking to the government to save us, but also, stop thinking that liberation from the government's going to save us either, because the corporations are not going to treat you any better than the government is. And so really we have to view these things as systems that we need to figure out how to hack them and cheat them and like extract the resources from a corporation, extract the resources from the government, get it to the people that you care about, use it for good. But these entities are ultimately not going to carry the day.
So I understand what you're
Right.
saying. I just have to, and I'll let Henry take the floor right after this.
Yeah.
I just have to say that I gotta give Franco some credit. Like, in like the 1920s, Spain was like third world infrastructurally. It had a lot of problems, and like Franco was able to make it architecturally a first world country and to make Spain like in a lot of ways fulfill its potential in Europe. But yeah, Henry, sorry, I'll let you guys keep going. We'll rotate with the panel a little bit here.
Yeah, I just want to introduce the new guests on the panel. We have Jose Miguel. Greetings. The Fascists, welcome, and Sevas. How you guys doing tonight? And
Good.
yeah.
Good, thank you. Glad to be here.
Really good.
Awesome. Yeah, if you guys have any questions for our guests or any comments or whatever, feel free. Guess we'll start with Sefa, since you were here first.
Yeah, I jumped on the stream about an hour in, so I see that this is mostly a left-wing dominated discussion. I mean, I would say that I'm hard to the right, but then I came to the realization that if you're any direction on the spectrum, you're still part of the system. So the way that I've characterized the right is that, and a lot of my thinking has been formed by mainly libertarian and Catholic thinkers, but I'd say my first influence was Lawrence Auster, who died in 2013. But my characterization of the right is that the right are just liberals in denial. Or another way to characterize them is that if liberals, generally speaking, are people driving to a cliff, the right is driving to a cliff at the speed limit. This is not to impugn your points of view, because I think you've made some, well, as far as I went into the stream, I think you made some good points of view regarding Hungary, for instance. I mean, I think they're allowed to have their views as far as they have been because they are geopolitically irrelevant, insofar as they can control the influx of migrants into the European Union, and also because of whatever strategic value they may or may not have. I mean, I don't know really that well because I haven't looked at a map of Eastern Europe lately, but I don't think that they would be as strategic as Ukraine is, because Ukraine has access to a warm water port, whereas Hungary is a landlocked country. But one of the things that I've noticed about how pathetic and useless the Anglophone right is that whenever one of these countries makes any overtures towards moving towards a Christian social order, their first instinct is, I'm going to move to that country. Whereas I'm thinking, right, instead of staying and trying to make your own place that you're currently in a better place to live, you're just going to outsource your problem solving to another country, which is a pure Anglo instinct, by the way. Which is, and as much as I, as a right-wing person, don't like living in California, there are multiple reasons why I stay. Number one, it's because my own personal situation makes it more convenient to live here. And number two, if we just keep retreating to geographic readouts, there'll be nowhere left for us to go, and we will only have ourselves to blame once we're completely strategically encircled. Plus, I'm actually long on California. And I mean, when I say long, I mean, I don't deny that the political and economic situation is going to deteriorate more in the short term. And by short term, I mean a span of a couple of decades. But once things have reached rock bottom, whoever is first to establish something of a cohesive order is the one who's going to be in charge, basically. And when I say go at things long, what I think about is the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. When Western Rome fell, it's not as if civilization completely disappeared. No, it was translated to the Germanic tribes that invaded and occupied the peninsula. But the funny thing is that as much as these Germanic tribes were attributed with destroying Rome, they actually translated Roman culture to wherever they went, like the Vandals. Sorry if I'm rambling a bit, but that's just all that I wanted to say.
Got it. Well, thank you, Cephas, for your commentary. I don't know if you guys have something to add, but yeah, I wanted to let fast for Jose Miguel if you guys want to speak for a bit. And I want to ask Jokkul, how much time do you have left? I don't want to keep you here all night. I know we talk a lot and we can get a bit autist here, but more or less, what's your, yeah. Give me a second. Can you guys hear him, or is it me?
No, I can't hear him. I can't either.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Unmute yourself. Still muted.
Yeah, Jokkul. Yeah, I don't think he gets that I don't think he gets he's muted.
Can you
There
hear
we
us?
go. Oh,
I still can't
no
hear him.
sound.
Yeah, there's no sound.
He's unmuted, but I don't hear sound.
Maybe he should leave the call and come back in. That sometimes solves it.
Yeah, that might be what he has to do.
Cool. Well, while he figures out the technical issues, yeah, I want to open it up for you guys. What do you guys have to say?
I know I personally wanted to hear more about what he meant by, speaking to the religious angle, because I actually, again, this is one of the small things I definitely agree with is concerning Hungary. Is when I look at Orban, I see essentially a political solution being applied to a what is fundamentally a religious problem, and I could say the same thing about Poland. And I'd also agree about it's it's really amazing the level of self-delusion that definitely those on the American right, and I use that in quotes because they're still liberals in denial, have this idea that they'll be able to build a remnant state from what is going from out of a U.S. collapse. Like I personally, I've been on the train of U.S. collapsing in the mid 2030s since I was like 17. But I don't see any like traditional state coming out of that mess. I see it breaking down into it's kind of similar to like Italy when it had its city-state period. You had like Tuscany, which was ruled by bankers. You had Venetia and Genoa, ruled by merchant corporations effectively. Like that's what I see is coming out of when the U.S. like my own personal expectation, like when the U.S. At the federal level just dissolves from its sheer like collapses under its own weight. I see essentially I'll call it a very essentially ruled by banker. That's what I see happening. But since Yo's back, I was wondering if you could just a little bit more in terms of you'd mentioned about how like the issues of what's going today are fundamentally religious in nature and government coming from religion, and that's something I definitely want to hear more about.
Sure. Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So briefly, the origin of the state is in religion. Early state formation is concerning really agriculture. You could talk about nomadic hunter-gatherers and their kind of clan organizations. But the state, as we know, as a sedentary, boundaried territory with particular laws. This is coming from an agricultural mode of society with a priest class where you get the issuance of currency. We think of this today, of course, crypto is trying to disrupt this to one, depending on how bullish you are in crypto, maybe successfully, or maybe that's just a part of the global state, right? A new form of state. But in any case, one of the initial factors of a state or powers of a state is to be able to issue currency to say this coin has value. And that is fundamentally religious in nature. David Graeber has his book on 1,000 Years of Debt, or just debt simply. He's describing the way in which coinage and currency and capital originates. And it is not in this libertarian explanation of, oh, well, people just kind of got together and they said, we'll make this utilitarian social contract. And it just makes logical, rational, praxiomatic sense. No, this was a religious, faith-based authority that was able to control people, that was able to exercise ritual and artwork toward the purpose of unifying people who were the first citizenry. Previously, you were either a slave or you were a clan member, a tribe member, but the concept of the citizenry and of civic religion is the first religion. Gene Gebser helps us to understand the shift in religion. He calls these things consciousness structures. So, for instance, Australian Aboriginals who are living in a hunter-gatherer society within the last 400 years, they were existing in what Gebser calls a magical consciousness structure. That is, they have a concept of dream time where the stream is this godlike entity. The rocks are gods. I'm a god. You're a god. Everything is kind of psychedelic. The past and the future are not so much important. The ecstatic rituals of the present are the dominant forms of spirituality. You can see this to an extent in any form of polytheism, which is multifarious, like the kami in Japan. There are thousands of gods, and there's always new gods coming in. So this then transfers to what Gebser calls the mythic consciousness structure. So now we have a concept of past, present, and future. We have a concept of gods, which are not these like formless, amorphous things, but they're actually human. You can see examples of transitory forms in the Egyptian gods, right? They're humans with the heads of animals. They're not quite fully human yet, but they're transitioning toward a human form. You see this in Greco-Roman myth, where the Olympians defeat the Titans. The Titans are these horrible monsters. They're not human at all. They have 100 different heads and 100 different arms. They have no human form, and they're defeated by the form of humanity. And this is a mythological representation of the very transition that Gebser's describing between magic and myth, where the magical consciousness, it's amorphous, it's Dionysian, it's ecstatic, it's Chthonian, and then you come in with myth, which starts to create these Jungian archetypes, starts to encode personalities. Zeus is a person, he has a human form. Apollo, Minerva, these different gods come in as supermen, as examples of the ideal human, or what would a human be like if they had unlimited power to defeat nature. So this is the origin of science. Now, it takes a long time to develop, and ultimately science fully realized transfers into a mental consciousness structure where we're no longer existing in a world of archetypes. We're no longer talking about magical gods who live in the sky, who live in heaven, but now things are brought into the material. We've come so far from the schizophrenia of the magical consciousness structure that Julian Jaynes describes as the bicameral mind. We're now in this analytical dominant mind, and it corresponds in neuroscience to the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, and the limbic system, broadly speaking. So as you transition through the dominance of these three modes of consciousness, you get different representations of religion, to the point where now we're in this hyper-analytical, statistical, data-driven idea of what the truth is, the truth in capital T. People lower down the chain of science. They don't actually do the work of empiricism. They just sort of receive these golden truths from on high and trust the science and what the science says. Ultimately, the religious mindset still exists. People still accept on faith propositions from authorities, but the actual generation of the tenets and dogmas of that faith are being mediated through different processes of consciousness. And ultimately, I track these through a tripartite class system, which is just broadly the warrior, priest, and merchant, and say that the magical consciousness structures of the warrior, the mythical consciousness structures of the priest, the mental consciousness structures of the merchant, and this kind of tracks with our economic development and why we think of the world today as being despiritualized, desacralized. Everything is sort of calculative. Everything is analytical. Everything is just a numbers game and a statistic. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is holy. It's because of this shift in consciousness structures at the top of society, which then translates and trickles down to the average person in forms of mass culture and media, public religion, and is represented in the nihilistic cartoons like Rick and Morty. That brings us kind of to the present day. So that's a a little bit of my view on the nature of religion and how it relates to power in the state, which I get from to a large extent John David Ebert, if you want to check him out on YouTube.
So just one quick follow-up question: is your worldview in terms of like how you're seeing history? Like my impression is it's very focused on psychology as the means of explaining events, patterns, human behaviors through time. Is that a correct assumption?
I mean, I think that's tautological, right? How do I understand human behavior? I use psychology, right? Psychology is the study of human behavior. So I think that is self-evident.
Fair enough. Does anyone, Festivus, you haven't said anything. Do you want to chime in or have anything to comment?
Well, first of all, I want to thank him for that wonderful breakdown, because that aligns with more or less what I've also come to believe regarding the development of the concept of the state and its relationship to power and where it derives authority and legitimacy. So that's a very good breakdown, honestly. Now, what I joined this stream about 5 to 10 minutes ago, and he was talking about, I guess, current political trends, and that's what I want to know more about. You were talking about Trump and about the potential near future that awaits America. I don't know what led to that conversation, but I would like a little more context on that, because I found that to be quite interesting.
My prognosis of the future is that things are going to largely stay the same and get slightly worse. I think that is the safe option. People who are desperate, people who engage in wishful thinking, like to fantasize about major change, like a collapse. I think that is very motivated by wishful thinking. It's not really grounded.
Revenge.
So yeah, my projection is that we're going to see a series of different figures who try to build upon the Donald Trump model, which a lot of people forget was based on the Barack Obama model, which a lot of people forget was based on the George Bush model, which people forget was built on Clinton and Reagan and Carter and Nixon. The fact is that all of these so-called revolutionary figures in politics are merely an adaptation of an earlier form. This concept that Donald Trump was a clean break with American politics is, again, delusional when it's said hysterically on the left and also when it's said devotionally on the right. The fact is that all of Donald Trump's antics, his divorces and pornographic liaisons, that's typical politics going back to John F. Kennedy. There's nothing new here. It's just a more crude, more gross, more dumbed down version of earlier politics. So we're going to get more of that. We're going to get more third grade level politics. Donald Trump Jr. owning the libs, putting out a video of how, Caitlyn Jenner is a hotter woman than, the trans women on the left. You're going to get, frankly, Donald Trump is leading two huge political reorientations. The exodus of the LGBT community from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. He doubled that constituency's vote for Republicans in 2020, which is amazing. He also doubled the Black female vote for Republicans. He also significantly increased the Hispanic vote for Republicans. I'm not saying these things are good or bad or in between. I'm just stating that this is what Trump ultimately represents. The left likes to present him as he represents racism and sexism, but he actually represents, the normalization of gay marriage, which was unthinkable under George Bush just, 2 decades ago. And he also represents the diversification of the Republican Party, which again was essentially George Bush's plan that, the Trump supporters said, no, we hate George Bush. Jeb Bush is a loser. But Donald Trump essentially accomplished what Jeb Bush intended to, but was basically too uncharismatic to accomplish. So, these are the sort of trends that I see. The Republican Party is going to become ridiculous and buffoonish, but that reflects, the populace and essentially what the state is desiring, that things kind of become a circus and a sideshow and a form of entertainment. Politics is replacing football as the nation's sport. The Republican Party is competing with the Democrat Party for seeing how much they can annoy the American public, because ultimately votes are not determined by who you love, they're determined by who you hate. You don't vote for Trump because you love Trump. You vote for Trump because you hate those Democrats. And you don't vote for Biden because you love Biden. You vote for Biden because you hate Trump. And so they're just going to keep competing for who can induce the most amount of hatred. The loser is the American public, who invests a religious fanaticism in either loving Trump or hating Trump, loving Obama or hating Obama. It's rising to religious fervor, but it's a very superficial religion, and it certainly doesn't serve the interests of its adherents. It serves the interests of a political class who grift off these people. I mean, if you've ever seen some of these emails that the Trump campaign sends out, their email list has millions of people, and they send out these things like, "This is your last chance to support President Trump. I thought you were a real Trump supporter, but you won't send him money in his hour of need. Are you a true patriot?" And then the Democrats will say, we have to defeat Trump. He's a Russian agent, and he's going to bring the KKK to America, and he's going to deport 30 million illegals, and he's going to bring concentration camps. It's the kids in cages, which of course was under Obama, right? But, it's this high stakes, intense thing. But ultimately, it doesn't have a lot of bearing on our lives. Trump, Biden, it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. It's pretty predictable at this point. And it's time for sensible, reasonable people to divest from the WWE politics. I like that phrase. It's kayfabe. Bernie Sanders, he's the kayfabe. He's there to get beat up by Hillary, beat up by Biden, in order to inflate the egoism that goes into these politics. But ultimately, it's superficial. We can vote. I mean, I vote, but you take 15 minutes, you go down, you vote. That's what you do. But you don't expect these people to save you. You understand that if you're going to have a hope, it's not going to be in this entertainment industry, unless you want to just grift, unless you're a grifter and you want to just make money out of it, like Bausch or Charlie Kirk or one of these people. But if you're actually interested in real change, I think you have to ask what's in your power and what's in your community, and what can you actually affect, who can you actually reach beyond, Trump's going to save us, or Trump's going to kill us. Things are going to slide on predictably in a downward direction. I would be very surprised if we got anything close to a collapse in the next 100 years. States do collapse. The collapse of states is fairly predictable. It's not something that is exactly hard to predict. The Soviet Union is not an example of a state collapsing. It's an example of intelligence agencies duking it out and one winning over the other. There is no intelligence. You could put up the Chinese, but the Chinese are our greatest trading partner. So they're not really interested in collapsing America. That would have huge consequences for them. So there's just really no alternative to America at this point. You can go and hide out in some, third world country if you want to, and maybe that's your best option. So whatever works for individuals, that's fine. But as a political solution to a global problem, that's not going to work. For my personal plan of what I do is, I'm in a small position. I don't start from a position of political privilege where I'm calling the shots. I'm just a regular guy like anybody else. And all I do is I try to talk to people and form relationships and where we can have mutual aid and we can help each other out. I think that's the only thing we can do. Some people say, oh, well, that's pathetic. That's not enough. And to those people, I say, you're living in a world of fantasy. You're wasting your time. You know, real life is a little bit less sexy, maybe. It's a little bit more mundane, but I think it's ultimately more rewarding.
Yeah, I fully agree with your analysis. Honestly, I also agree that I don't see a great collapse in front for America. I do think it is just a slow and very painful withering away in the manner that you described it very well. You've clearly put a lot of thought into all of this. I don't know you very well, but it seems like you've spent a lot of time and energy with these questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't have any further questions. If anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah, and Jay, how much time do you have with us, more or less? I know we're approaching 2 hours, so if anyone has rapid fire questions, but if you got to go,
sorry to talk over you. I just wanted to say I've enjoyed being on here. I appreciate you guys. I can take maybe 5 more minutes of questions and then I got to go, but hey, we can do this again sometime. So, you know, if you guys want to have me back on, I'm happy to come back on.
Oh yeah, I'll be honored for a part 2. I think you know, the panel has a lot to say, and yeah, no, it's been really informative, and yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, go ahead, Cephas or anyone.
All right, since you are limited, since you are time limited, I just wanted to know, in 1 minute, or less, could you describe your views on epistemology?
Wow. You are pranking me tonight, aren't you? 1 minute for epistemology. Geez. Okay, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm not even qualified to answer that philosophical question. I have so much more that I would need to learn and understand. But the way I would start, so like, if you're going to ask me, what's my strategy to learn as much as I can about epistemology in 1 minute, where I would start would be with the question of authority. Where do we get authority? Authority can come from empirical sense perception, but we know that's limited. So where else do we get our authority? From science? What is the scientific method? Things become so vast that ultimately we don't have time as individuals to specialize in everything and to fact check everyone. And so ultimately it comes down to religious systems of faith. I mean, I grew up as a scientismist, you know. I believed in science TM, you know, Carl Sagan and Isaac Newton, and those were my heroes. So that's what I grew up with. I've started to become self-aware of that and see that it's not as quote unquote scientific as I made it out to be. And I've become open to other religions, frankly. So I'm still working on that, but wow, there's no way I could answer that in 1 minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is
there's a question here in the comments. Does he believe in the soul? I guess.
Wow, that again is a really
loaded questions. Like, I know.
Okay, let's ask like stupid political questions for 2 hours. Okay, you have 2 minutes. Do you believe in a soul? What's your epistemology? It's like, geez, we should have started.
Yeah, that's we'll leave it for the part 2. I think
we're on a high note, I guess.
Yeah, I want to get in on that stream early when that happens, because those are such interesting topics.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think this is really, it's like once we got the political bullshit out of the way, it's like, yeah, politics is dumb. Okay, let's get into religion. Let's get into spirituality. Let's get into the soul. That's exciting because those are concepts which are not here to abuse us. Those are concepts which are here to empower us. Those are concepts which are here to enlighten us and to give us a sense of who we are, an identity that's not attached to the state, that's not attached to corporate consumer culture. but it's actually rooted in why we're here, which is to make a true, deep, and intimate impact in our own lives, in our own spiritual lives, and in the lives of other people. So that's my feeling about the soul. I mean, for like, how do I prove a belief in the soul, and what do different, because people use that term soul in different ways at different times. There's a history to it. I have to keep myself to a 2-hour time limit here, so I'm going to leave it on that note. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon. So, ta-ta, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.
God bless. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. Yeah. For those who don't know what epistemology is, that's basically the study of learning truth and what is valid information. And I'd say the reason why I ask this question is because first of all, just to see if somebody is smart enough to know what the word is, number one.
Yeah. I mean, you had sorry to cut you off, but I mean, I simply summarize it as the theory of knowledge. That's how I would summarize it.
Yeah. And most of all, because the public health crisis of the past 2 years, I've characterized it as mainly an epistemological crisis rather than an epidemiological one, because the thing is, who's telling the truth and who can you believe? Who do you believe, me or your own lying eyes? That's the way that I see it.
My lying eyes or your lying eyes?
Yeah. It's the Cretan liar paradox all over again.
I was just going to say it was cool to learn at the end, because that was the question I was thinking of asking Cephas. It was cool to learn at the end that he grew up as a naive empiricist, essentially, but is now interested in other systems.
Right, because the thing is, a purely materialistic ethos or worldview is eventually going to collapse upon itself once materials run out. And depending on whose forecasts you're looking at, we're either at peak oil, peak water, peak rare earth minerals. But from multiple different analyses, the world as we know it today cannot perdure. And there's so many internal contradictions to how our world is being sustained and run that eventually, because mankind will run out of bread, they will learn very quickly and very harshly that man does not live on bread alone. So maybe he can come to a genuine religious conversion. I can pray for that, certainly. But conversions don't really happen unless the convert wants it for himself. So that's the thing.
That being said, I want to do final thoughts and wrap up the show. If I don't know if you guys would be interested in an asado after this, and we can all chop it up there. But any of you guys have final thoughts on the discussion we were having earlier with the guests and whatnot? Fascist, let me go.
Yeah, well, like I said, I wasn't here for most of it. I got the invite pretty late, but from the little that I did hear, my final thoughts, I am very much intrigued by that guest that you had on. I don't even know his name, but just from hearing him speak about the topics that he was speaking about, he was very, very much someone that I would find interesting to listen to and maybe interact with again, have him on again, and maybe show up a little earlier to have that conversation, because the questions at the end were questions that also greatly interest me, and I have a passion for exploring different ideas and thoughts about these things. I really appreciate that the caliber of the guest that was on here, as well as you, Cephas. You had some good back and forths with him. that's really honestly it. I wasn't here long enough to say anything else, honestly.
Yeah, I would. The way that I would describe my interactions with people on the other side of the aisle is that I would much rather speak with a leftist outside the Overton window than a rightist inside it.
The same way. I'm the exact same way. Now, what do you mean when you say like left and right in this specific case? I missed the context.
Well, left and right in the current contemporary instantiation of the American political context. So, and the thing is, what is left and right keeps flipping.
Yeah.
It keeps flipping because we've now entered an era where the right actually cares about undocumented people, but the document in this case is proof of vaccination rather than citizenship.
Right. What did you mean when you called him left and yourself right? Well, I guess that's what I meant to know.
Well, I think I have seen this guy before on Guillermo's streams, and he talks more from the point of view of social and more economic left than social left um, points of view. But the way that he was critical about Hungary and Poland being these rising Christian nations and whatnot, that's where I sensed that he was someone of the left. I mean, I would say that I'm a rightist because mainly the topics I've been reading for the past 20 years, and because I read more libertarian blogs and more traditionalist religious blogs. But really, the thing is, I'm more of a religious person than I am a rightist person, because being left or right just specifies which seats that you're sitting on in the house of liberalism, and
Yeah.
not necessarily your true beliefs. And I mean, from the point of view of Christian Catholic thought, these past 300 years have been an aberration in the social order, because most of them were propped up by violent revolts against Christian monarchs, or in the case of England, a revolt of the so-called Christian monarch against the religious order.
Right. Okay.
Anyone else has final thoughts? I'll open a new stream as an asado, and I'll wrap this one up. And
are you going to post it on Twitter?
Yeah, I'll post it. Just give me 2 minutes, and we'll be there momentarily. And with that being said, copy. With that being said, thank you all, and goodbye.
God bless you guys.
God bless. Take care.